Welcome to the New Leadership for Society series, People and Planet in the Information Era. I am Professor Brian Lowry, and I will host this series, which is 10 sessions focused on the immense opportunity and the critical challenges for society presented by the rapid explosion of information in our world. We'll use the same YouTube channel for each session, and we'll send weekly reminders for upcoming sessions. Today, we're joined by Mike Rothschild, author of The Storm is Upon Us and The World's Worst Conspiracies, and Jitarth Jadeja, a former QAnon believer and moderator of Reddit subchannel QAnon Casualties. Thank you both for taking the time.
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. So I'd love to start with you, Jitarth, and for you to give us just a quick synopsis of what your experience with QAnon was.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of fell into conspiracies after the 2016 election. I guess I was pretty much confused, like everyone else was, about how Donald Trump could win, given how unlikely it seemed beforehand. And during that first year, I guess I got kind of, I wouldn't say irritated, but I guess it just kind of bothered me that there was things that the media would report about Trump where they would say, take him literally when he's being figurative, or, vice versa. Or even things like when he's visiting Shinzo Abe and, Shinzo Abe drops all the koi fish food in the koi pond. Trump doesn't, and then they clipped out that clip of Shinzo, just focus on Trump and make him look like an idiot. So just tiny, small things like that. That kind of just sort of spiraled out of control into the sense where I didn't know who to trust and what major media organization or figure to sort of read anymore. So then I kind of found Alex Jones, specifically because Donald Trump went on Alex Jones' show. I spent the next year falling really deep into conspiracies, and I eventually converted my dad into it. And then by the time Q came on the scene, I was pretty much ready and primed to jump on board. And then, over the next year and a half, I was really deep into it, like spent all day looking at it, just from every angle, reading as much as I could. And then, ironically, it was an article by Mike Rothschild, the one and the same, the best Rothschild, I like to say, that actually started my, I guess, good journey out. He had written a specific article talking about, it was in regards to court cases that are being filed in the United States. Essentially, it was just bad data analysis, and Mike pointed that out. And that really sort of started my journey out. And then 6 months later, I got out, made a Reddit post, moved on with the rest of my life. Dad was still a QAnon person. Then I started getting requests for interviews because of my Reddit post. And yeah, here I am. So that's a very succinct and probably not a very good summary, but that's roughly the long and short of it.
I appreciate that. Thanks. And Mike, you were just given credit for writing an article about QAnon conspiracy theory that helped Jitarth get out. So can you tell us a little bit about your work on conspiracy theories?
Sure. So I've been interested in conspiracy theories going all the way back to when I was in college, and I was a fan of the Art Bell Coast to Coast AM radio show. And it wasn't that I believed any of this stuff, but all of it was really interesting to me. It was very outside of my worldview. And, I didn't know anybody who was into UFOs and crop circles and the face on Mars. It was interesting from a storytelling and a belief standpoint. And I sort of bounced around a couple different careers, and then I found myself writing about conspiracy theories from a debunking standpoint. And I really started doing this maybe about 10 years ago. And we really weren't at this point yet. There was the 9/11 truth movement, but that had really burned out. And you had the Obama birth certificate thing, but that was still very fringe, and like that, most people weren't into that. And it was, it was like really racist, and people didn't want to talk about it, which it was. And so it was this moment where conspiracy theories were growing in popularity, and there were more mechanisms to kind of distribute them and create them, but it wasn't the sort of everybody knows somebody who believes in one of these things point that we're in right now. And I found that there was a real market for, sort of a succinct journalistic debunking of some of these things, and I realized that there really was a need for it. I've been doing it about a year and a half, and a blog post I'd written for the critical thinking podcast Skeptoid got just a huge amount of views, like 200,000 views. And I didn't understand why. So it was this post I wrote about the pseudoscience called oil pulling. And this is when you swish some oil around in your mouth, like olive oil or coconut oil, and you spit it out, and it's supposed to draw all the toxins out of your mouth and cure whatever disease you have. Well, obviously, that's not a thing. That's not how science or health work. But this piece had this huge viewership. And I realized after a while that it was because Dr. Oz had mentioned oil pulling on his show. And of course, he talked about it in this, like, oh, you got to try it. It's going to help you. It's going to be great. And I realized that there were people who were watching these figures, watching these conspiracy theorists and these charlatans, and they were looking for more information. And they went to Google. And Google could either give them things that reinforced the nonsense that they'd started to get into, or gave them information that said, hey, let's pull back on this. That's not how toxins work. That's not how disease works. You can't actually do that. And I realized that not only was there a need for it, you really could get a lot of readership if you did it in a way that didn't talk down to people and that understood why people believed in these things and what they were looking for. And it really kind of went from there. And I was able to write my first book, and I got a book agent through that and published my second book. And now unfortunately, I'm sort of busier than ever writing about QAnon and hoaxes and all of these other things. And they don't show any sign of retreating back to the fringe. They really are the mainstream now.
Yeah, so I'm curious about the history, because conspiracy theories aren't new. Right? I mean, long before there was the internet, there were conspiracy theories. So what is the role of technology and the data that's information that's available to us now in terms of either making those things available to people or pulling them in? Like, how do I think about how technology interacts with conspiracy theories?
Yeah, it's a great question. Technology does not turn people into conspiracy theorists. And I don't think we are more conspiratorial as a people than we used to be, certainly not in the United States. There's been a lot of polling about conspiracy theory beliefs, and it's really the percentages are the same. But what you have that's different now is the speed with which conspiracy theories can be created, the ease with which they can spread, and how anybody can now make their own. And they don't need a printing press. You don't need editing equipment. You just need a Twitter account, basically. And you can make up anything. And as long as you are really prolific and you tell a story that some people are going to want to be true, you can not only get people interested in it, you can start making money off of it really, really easily. So you have the ease of communication, and you have the lure of the easy money that you can get through, Substack subscriptions, through blog ads, through all of these other things, through merchandise, where now you can be a professional conspiracy theorist, and you don't need to write a 1,500-page book. You don't have to produce, 3-hour-long videos. You just post a lot of content, and people will flock to it.
What's interesting about that is, as you mentioned, right, you watch, in your example you gave, Dr. Oz, you hear about this thing, you're not sure if it's real or not. You go online, and there's all sorts of information, some of it true, some of it not true. I just wonder, why is it that so many people are falling into the conspiracy theories as opposed to when they go find the information being repelled by it, right? So, and I'll give that to you, Jitarth. Like, when you started looking, how is it, do you think, that you ended up in QAnon as opposed to thinking like this doesn't make any sense and it's unreasonable?
Yeah, that's a great question. It starts out with a complete lack of trust in mainstream media. I think that is really what drove me towards alternative media sources. And it wasn't the sense that I was willing to believe anything that I heard. It was just that I was now suddenly open to things that I previously would have just dismissed, like, out of hand. So I don't want to really, I don't want to, what's the word? I don't want to drag the media over the coals, because that happens enough, to be fair. And I thought they've always been personally very fair to me and other QAnon believers. But in terms of the technology, like previous question, I think there was definitely a reason why it spread so fast, and I think it has to do with the destruction of the mainstream media. And I don't mean destruction in terms of like journalistic ethics and whatnot. I mean in terms of before, say around 2010, it's mainstream, all the newspapers, all the articles, they got their funding via advertisements. Then around 2010, 90% of their new funding and advertisement money were going to Google and Facebook. I mean, if you take an industry and cut its revenue by 90%, what are you going to get? So they're sharing. So they, along with QAnon people, have essentially used the fact that website media algorithms, which are designed to engage you, and anger is one of the most obvious, engaging emotions, have sort of filled that gap. And as a result, more people have access to it. And I think essentially that's we just haven't learned how to deal with this much information this quickly being sprouted by this many people at any one point. I guess that's what I would say.
Mm-hmm. And Mike, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's a great explanation. I think the fact that so many people do distrust the media is a huge part of why these things spread, because I think it really does stem from distrust, from the feeling that everybody is lying to you. The media is lying to you. The doctors are lying to you. The politicians are lying to you. Big business is lying to you. The advertising industry is lying to you. But I'll tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you what they don't want you to know. And of course, what they don't want you to know really depends on whatever product that person happens to be pitching. So it really does stem from, if everybody's lying to me, I'm going to believe who I want to believe. And the person who tells me things that already dovetail with what I already believe and what I grew up hearing and what my friends think, and what my family thinks, because nobody wants to feel stupid. Nobody wants to feel like they're being exploited or lied to or used. So you flock to somebody who is giving you the answers, who's giving you the real story, the thing that everybody else is hiding from you. You want to find the person who is telling you the truth. It's just that truth at that point becomes extremely malleable.
So that raises another question for me, because it sounded like in Jitarth's story, it wasn't as if he was looking for a particular answer. He was just looking for some answer. And so I assume that's often the case. How do people decide what is the true answer? I mean, what is truth? Because it starts to sound like mainstream media is not just, the New York Times or the Washington Post or ABC or whatever. It starts to sound like the mainstream media is anyone who's telling you the things that everyone else is telling you. So,
right.
How do people decide what is real? What is true?
To me, it really goes back to what you already believe. And, the thing I say about QAnon is that people don't just wake up one morning and decide that they believe in QAnon. They find something that reaches back to something that they already believe. So somebody gets pulled into QAnon because, they already really didn't like Hillary Clinton. Or they get pulled into the anti-vaccine movement because, they don't really trust vaccines, or they really prefer Eastern medicine. You find the things that already meshed with the things that you already believe, because you don't want to rewrite your worldview on the fly. You think you're right and everybody else is wrong, or at least everybody else has something to hide. So you gravitate toward the movements that make you feel like you're the one who has the truth. And it's not, mainstream, it's not readership. It's that idea of everybody else is hiding something or using you. I'm not hiding anything. I'm not using you. We are on the same team. Now, the fact that you're usually not on the same team with that person, you don't think about that, because you just go with it because they are the ones who are making you feel good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think a lot of the times, say, my frustration with, for me, the mainstream media would just be normal media, just like New York Times, like Channel 2 and BBC, just like major news organizations. So when during the election, it's like they wouldn't talk about, say, Hillary Clinton, the global Clinton initiative, right? That bothered me because I thought that was something that should be talked about. The WikiLeaks John Podesta's emails, like wherever they came from, showing sort of like a bit of a collusion between the DNC and Hillary and versus Bernie. That wasn't talked about. So when you're not getting the kind of information that you want, that sort of like that sort of like Mike said, that sort of continues along with your previous bias, you go looking elsewhere, and then someone else will talk about it, and then just like Mike said, they'll talk about something else, and you trust them. And just for example, I remember when Alex Jones said something like, "Oh, they're turning the frogs gay." Like that's a great example, right? Or a terrible example, depending on how you want to put it. And he would show you like an article, and it's literally like a misreading of a scientific paper involving a specific chemical. And I think that a lot of the time, people really do have a hard time separating, even today, literal from figurative. If someone says, say, Russia is behind the Nord Stream attack, for example, they will usually say something like, it's highly likely that Russia was the suspect behind the Nord Stream attack. Then someone else will say, well, obviously Russia blew up their own pipeline. And then it just sort of goes on from there. And no one's really taking what other people are saying in good faith. So, yeah, I just wanted to add to what Mike said, but I might have just rambled on a bit. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious about your experience in particular, because it sounded like you were not a Trump fan going in, and you were like surprised that he was elected. But a lot of the beliefs associated with QAnon present Trump as I don't know if it's going too far, but as some kind of messiah or fighter for the
that's exactly
side.
That's exactly right.
How did that mesh? How did you incorporate that into your thinking?
So previously, there was a sort of anti-establishment theme that Bernie Sanders campaign and the Trump campaign had in common. And, Trump, while he was campaigning, like, look, I'm going to be honest, he was just very funny. Like, he made some funny jokes. I thought it was entertaining. And then he got into office and he was saying all these things like, we're going to pull out of Afghanistan. He's going to bring a better public healthcare system, like all these stuff, right? He's going to build a wall. Not that I really cared about that, but like, it was only in the year previously that, as I saw what I felt like was unfair treatment of Donald Trump, that I completely sort of became not just like a defender of Donald Trump, and then almost a Trump supporter as a reaction, and a full-blown Trump supporter by the end of it, to the point where it wasn't until the end of the year where essentially nothing happened. Like, they didn't do anything. All he did was pass some, tax cuts that any cookie cutter Republican would have passed. I was very disillusioned with Donald Trump. And that was almost the perfect time for Q to strike, because Q comes along and he's like, no. Trump is winning. Everything's going according to plan. You're actually right. You don't have to socially back down after all those stupid posts on Facebook and ranting to your friends at parties for the last 2 years. No. Don't worry about it. It's you who's going to have the last laugh. So that's kind of how I ended up as a Trump supporter. Like, and to be honest, now it's like, don't even ask. I don't know.
Well, I want to piggyback on Jitarth about that entertaining aspect of Trump. I will never forget watching the first Republican debate, and this was late 2015. And it's, there's 10 people on stage, and it's Trump and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and John Kasich and all these others. And everybody sounds the same. They're all saying the same things. They all the same cut of their suit. They all talk the same way. And then there's Trump, and he's telling jokes, and he's insulting them, and he's just dunking on them left and right, and he's getting laughs, and he's enjoying himself. And I'm going, he's going to win the nomination, because everybody else is the same except him. He's entertaining. He's funny. He doesn't care about the norms of Washington. He doesn't care about the sort of very practiced Reagan-esque political speech. He's just going to say anything, and it doesn't matter because you're enjoying it, and he's different. And I'm like, he's going to get the nomination. Now, I didn't think he was going to win, but I realized that what he was offering people was character and entertainment, and turning something very dry and dull into a full body contact sport. And I think you got some of that same feeling with QAnon. I think you get some of that same feeling with future conspiracy theories. it's not about debate. It's not about, who's got the best tax policy. It's about owning the libs. It's about trolling. It's about having a good time. And there's something really appealing about that for a lot of people, because politics is just dull and it's not interesting. But Trump is interesting and it's different. And I really feel like that's a big part of what hooks people into movements like this.
And do you think that's new? Is the focus on entertainment new? Is that a part of our era, or has that always been the case? I mean, because I don't, it seemed before there was more. Maybe this is putting a gloss on the past, but more seriousness than now.
There was a lot more seriousness. It was grim. It was like the White House, the Oval Office is like a sacred place, and the optics are incredibly important. And it was like devastating when Jimmy Carter wore a sweater because it meant that Americans were going to have to turn their heat up. And then there's Trump, and he just doesn't care. He doesn't care how it looks. He looks dumb. Who cares? His fans don't think he's dumb. His fans think he's a genius. So it is entertainment. It is, pro wrestling is the analogy that so many people use. And there's a lot of that to it. It's playing to the crowd. It's like, oh no, you think I'm down? No, I'm going to get back up. You got to knock me down again. And people get into that, and you can't fault people for that. Trump is just really, really good at it in a way that I can't really think of any other politician right now who can do that.
And do you think this is a trend? You think that, it's hard to imagine that the genie gets put back in the bottle if this is what you think people are looking for. So I'm curious how you imagine the future in terms of politics, given what you just said.
I think the future is a lot more Marjorie Taylor Greenes, a lot more Matt Gaetzes, a lot more people who have a gimmick and a brand, and the way they dress is part of that brand, and the way they tweet is part of that brand. And if you look at somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she gets made fun of all the time on the left because she uses all these words incorrectly and her tweets are full of typos. She's not stupid. Now she's not like educated. She's not a genius, but she knows how to get people to talk about her. And one of the things that Trump really, I think, exploited is they hate you and they hate me. They laugh at us, so we're going to get the last laugh on them. Trump would say all the time, they're coming after you. I'm just in the way. Marjorie Taylor Greene will always talk about how they make fun of me and my typos, but that means we're winning. That kind of thing, I think, is never going to leave politics now.
And what's the role of political ideology? Because everyone you're talking about now is conservative, but there's no reason to think that conspiracy thinking is linked to political ideology. But how should we make sense of the relationship between conspiracy thinking and political ideology, if any?
Jitarth, I know that the sort of the anti-Bernie aspect really pulled you into a lot of this, and
100%. No, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but
no, I've rambled enough.
no, fair enough. But yeah, I would just say that I think you will see certain you won't see a complete QAnon takeover of the Republican Party, not because it can't happen, but mainly because there's no one uniform set of QAnon theories. Different sects, different areas have their own particular beliefs and whatnot. What I think you will see, and we have seen, starting with really the big lie, was that there are specific QAnon theories that originate directly from, say, 8chan, or directly from, say, whatever, an old community board. That
or one of the big influencers.
Exactly. That permeates through a series of, say, affiliations. Like the January 6th report, there were people talking about QAnon, trying to talk to Trump about it. So, for example, the Mike, you would know better than me, but the Dominion voting machines, the Venezuelan thing, the whole fight out and shoot out in Germany. So these things are seeping into say the Republican political ideology, and even stuff like the vaccine, which is really, I don't want to say frightening, but it is disconcerting because Trump isn't anti-vaccine himself. He, Operation Warp Speed was his initiative. It was you could argue that it was probably the best thing he did. right? On top, but oh, then it's like a lot to compare to. But anyway, my point is that he originally wanted people to get the vaccine. You know, it was the opposite way around with, you know, Nancy Pelosi going down to San Francisco and Chinatown and whatnot. But even now, when he tells people to get the vaccine, they boo him. Mm-hmm. So it is on. He's literally. This is how I saw it, and this like a couple of years ago. And it probably doesn't make sense, but it's like, how would I explain to Donald Trump that, hey, Donald, there's a conspiracy theory about you. By the way, something that you heard that they originated, you now heard, you think that's true. So now stuff that you say, they are regurgitating, vice versa, and you are now a believer in parts of a conspiracy theory about yourself. On top of that, you're not even the Messiah anymore because they don't listen to everything you say. So I have no idea how to draw a diagram of that, let alone predict how that would affect American politics. And obviously there are conspiracy theories on the left too, right? It's like, but it's not like this, dude. It's not like it. This is different. Like, this is really like a COVID of the mind.
And Mike, why don't you think there's the same level of conspiracy theory right now, at least on the left?
Yeah, it's complicated because I think liberalism tends to, I think, shy away from those sort of messianic figures. There's a lot of like, you know, we save us, that kind of thing. But which of course is a total flip from the way it was in, you know, certainly the beginning of the Reagan Revolution, where it was like Republicans were the one who were anti-government and like liberals wanted the government to do everything for them. And I think that's a real indication of how the ideologies have shifted. I mean, Donald Trump is the guy who's saying, I alone can fix it. You know, the idea of like Ronald Reagan or George H.W. Bush saying only the president of the United States can fix things. That's a complete 180. You know, I think where liberal conspiracy theories are is maybe not so much political, but maybe more in terms of health. And this is really where during the beginning of lockdown, you really saw so many wellness and health freedom and anti-big pharma and anti-vax people and communities start gravitating toward QAnon, because they weren't Trump people. They maybe were even apolitical. Like, they maybe didn't like Hillary Clinton, but whatever. But now you start thinking about this virus and you're going, well, who did this? Who's to blame for this? And it's very easy to look at this and go, it was Bill Gates. Because you already hate Bill Gates. You already distrust Bill Gates. It was Pfizer. Because you already distrust Pfizer and you don't want anything to do with Western medicine. So it's very easy to go down that kind of wellness to fascism pipeline. It's not because you're a fascist. It's just because you are looking for answers and you're looking for alternate explanations, but it's not necessarily about politics. It's about health, or it's about agriculture, or it's about banking, and, you know, some of those more traditional conspiracy touchdowns. You know, anti-Semitism was hugely popular on the left in the late 19th century and into the 20th century. You know, many of the very early socialist thinkers, rabid anti-Semites, wrote, you know, scabrous pamphlets demanding Jews be deported or executed. So it's not completely foreign. It just takes a slightly different tack.
Yeah, I'm curious about the possibility of this, the use of social media to promote these kind of theories affecting political ideology. Because what you're describing to some extent is on the ends, everyone is susceptible, and they maybe have a strange blending, right? So you have, for example, people who are anti-vaccinations on the left, not anti-COVID necessarily, but for example, anti-chickenpox, anti-measles. And are those, why wouldn't a conspiracy theorist like a QAnon go after those people? So I'm just wondering if you can imagine, or if it's possible that the dissemination of information the way we have now kind of affecting the kind of normal political lines that we've grown accustomed to.
Yeah, and that's really where the big influencers come in, where it's not just the Q drops, it's the video makers, it's the podcasters. You know, they make these really slick videos like Plandemic, like Fall of the Cabal, these things that they're not sort of 3 hours of somebody rambling into a camera. They're like 30 minutes long, and they're really slick and they're really well made. And it doesn't take that long to watch, and especially if you're on lockdown and you don't have anything else to do. You're going to go, well, I'm going to watch this. My friend sent it to me, whatever. I'll just laugh at it. But then there's one thing in it that you go, oh, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And if there's one thing that grabs you in the really anti-Semitic, really hateful, really conspiracy-filled video, well, there's probably going to be something else. And if you were already really on the fence, you're going, I don't know if I need that shot. I don't need the chickenpox vaccine. I got chickenpox as a kid and I was fine. That's just that tiny little opening that it needs to find the next thing and the next thing and the next thing in your own life that you go, well, that didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I didn't get what I wanted there. I lost something. And this person is kind of explaining things in a way that other people don't talk about. I'm not allowed to think these things. You start to feel like you're being kind of persecuted. Your grievances are being listened to. And it's very, very personal. Every single person's journey into a conspiracy movement, into a cult, into a scam movement, that's all different because everybody's life is different. That's why it's so hard to get people out, because everybody gets out a different way because everybody got in a different way.
And I'm curious about that. Like, are algorithms targeting people in particular ways? Because how unique is it? I wonder. Because Jitarth, like you said, you started out thinking like, hey, what's going on? How did Trump get elected? And then you fell into this hole. But it seems that suggests that you're being fed a steady diet of some sort. Did you feel targeted? Like, what was that experience like?
Look, I went looking for Alex Jones. Like, that was not something that just sort of popped up on YouTube. But obviously, once you start, showing an interest in a particular thing, it shows you more of that. So I think it depends on the platform, really. YouTube, for example, it is slightly like right-leaning, and it's very conspiratorial. So it's not too hard to be pushed into something conspiratorial on YouTube. And it's not even just about like QAnon. Like, there was one about something about the NFTs with the ugly monkeys. Forgot what it's called. But I also know that, for example, if you're talking on Twitter, and Twitter is important not because it's a great social media tool, not because it's a great place to have a discussion, but because significant people are on it. Journalists are on it, writers are on it, professors are on it. That is significant in of itself. And when you switch the algorithm to not just be, say, timeline based, that you just see things that they occur over time, to seeing things that you interact with, and again, things that make you angry. That is, I think, people are just gonna get mad. They're just gonna get mad over everything. They're just primed to get angry. They're primed to argue. They're primed to disagree. And I think this sort of culture just didn't really exist on the internet pre-Facebook. I mean, if you refer to someone as a Nazi, it's Goodwin's law. Like, people would call you a fool for just even mentioning that. So I think it's specific algorithms, but also, like you said, because there's so much information, in order to try and curate the amount of information there is and that it's been given to you, naturally social media companies are going to feed you more of what you like. So with the lack of trust in mainstream media, the lack of trust in government, a splintering sort of community filled with millions of people who probably haven't even met each other, just around the world, I think it's I don't think it's even a technology thing. I think it's a very human thing. And the last thing I'll say, sorry, I should have mentioned this earlier. The one thing I have seen in common anecdotally about people who fall into conspiracy theories, and this is not scientific, so I could be 100% wrong, is that there does seem to have been some sort of preceding traumatic event that occurred. For me, for example, it was finding out that I had ADHD and bipolar. So specifically ADHD. So that was very traumatic because I had sort of internalized a lot of character flaws that were obviously symptoms of a medical condition. I think people also forget COVID was very traumatic when it started. Like, it happened very quickly. Countries were shutting. A couple of weeks before, everyone was saying it's not a big deal. Then, the flu was worse. Then 2 weeks later, countries are shutting borders down, businesses are closing, people are on lockdown, and we had never had a vaccine for any kind of coronavirus. We didn't even know where it came from. It was so traumatic that no one had any answers, so they just sort of went looking for answers. And yeah, and I just think that I don't really know how to finish this sentence, but that's about it.
I'm curious about the other side of social media a little bit because Tarth, you are the moderator of the Reddit channel for people who are kind of leaving QAnon. I'm curious about how do people end up there, and once you take a foot out, are you then also going to be like, ushered out quickly and easily? Like, I mean, does it work the same in both directions? Is kind of what I'm asking.
It can. For me, for example, once I was out, like I was done. Like I never want to hear a conspiracy about anything for the rest of my life ever again. For other people, it takes time. It is a bit of back and forth. They need to be almost reassured that their social standing in society will not be completely destroyed for the rest of their life. Because I think there's a lot of I just genuinely I don't believe for 1 second that there's a whole bunch of QAnon followers who are as as who think Q is completely correct as they did a couple of years ago. Like I'm sure that they would love to sort of go back in reverse time and just pretend none of this ever happened, never get into it. But they can't because they feel like if they come back, they'll get piled on, and maybe some of them should, maybe some of them shouldn't. Like it's not for me to answer, but yeah, I think it does depend on the person. But at the end of the day, I have always found the person really does need to get themselves out. Like you can give them the information, you can sort of plant the idea in their head, just sort of almost connect all 9 dots out of 10, but you have to let them do the last dot themselves. Otherwise, it just doesn't stick.
Mike,
yeah, that's very. Oh, go ahead, please.
I was going to actually give you a chance to talk about this at a higher level. So I know that you testified about the threat that misinformation poses to democracy. I just want you to help us think about, you take this out of like the particular individuals that fall down this path and think about it at a broader social level. How should we think about how this could affect the democracy?
Well, it has an enormous effect. What it does is it destroys people's trust in the sort of the basics of democracy. It erodes the trust that your vote is going to count, that the election will be certified in the way that it actually went down. My biggest fear going into the midterms in 2022 was that you're going to have these Q-pilled Secretary of State candidates who won in places like Arizona and Nevada, Wisconsin or Michigan, I think. And when it came time to certify a presidential election, they were just going to say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to decide who wins. And that's when you have a dictatorship, when your vote is just a piece of paper dropped in a box and the people at the top just decide who's going to win. That's not a democracy anymore. So when I see people already starting to downplay the threat that there was in 2022, I'm like, no, I was reading what these people were saying. These people were talking about Joe Biden did not win. I will not certify a Democrat in 2024, no matter what. And these were, the Secretary of State candidate in Arizona, Mark Fincham. This is Jim Marchand in Nevada. These were people who had a serious chance of winning. And fortunately, I think enough people really understood that, yeah, you like Trump more than somebody else. Maybe you have some questions about the COVID vaccine and you don't quite trust it. But at the end of the day, you're not quite willing to put democracy on the funeral pyre. Maybe you are going to take a step back and say, there are lines that I'm not willing to cross. And my question going into the midterms was, are we too far gone? Is this just a foregone conclusion? And it wasn't. And I think it proves that the majority of people are not that concerned about Hunter Biden's laptop. The majority of people are not that concerned about cancel culture police coming for them and, taking away their Dr. Seuss books. People still care about kitchen table issues, the economy, unemployment, safety, things like that. And that maybe we're not quite as far gone as something like January 6th would have made us think. And of course, we're going to get to repeat that whole thing in the next election, and it's going to be even higher stakes because it's a presidential election. So the degree to which misinformation, conspiracy theories, hoaxes have affected people, it's happened incredibly quickly, but we still have a chance to pull back somewhat from the precipice of where we were.
I like the positive spin. I appreciate that. The positive, I wouldn't call it spin, the positive approach.
Yeah.
Jitarth, you were going to jump in?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely a threat to democracy, because fundamentally QAnon is like QAnon is literally the declaration of martial law, unsealing of sealed indictments, like, you know, military tribunals for members of the cabal like Hillary Clinton and George Soros and whoever, followed by the public execution, right? And then, like all great revolutions, military fashion takeovers, everything's great afterwards, right? But the thing is, like, it wouldn't bother me if this was just a conspiracy theory about, like, oh, the moon landing is actually a giant eyeball in the sky and we live on the face of a giant, you know, mountain giant. I wouldn't care. The problem is that, like, I'm sure Mike could attest to this too, is that when a prophecy fails, people tend to try and bring about that prophecy. Yeah. That when a group and their behavior gets sort of more and more agitated, you know, more restrictions are placed on the group. As a result, they get more agitated, then more restrictions, and eventually they'll try and, you know, induce a prophecy. So with Heaven's Gate, it was committing suicide to try and get the UFOs to come and take them, you know, away. With QAnon, it's just a declaration of martial law. And it's like, it is not so unbelievable that a large group of militia could try and cook up something to that extent. But on the other hand, it's not just one way. Like, the Democrats funded QAnon Republican candidates specifically because they knew they would lose. And they did. But they put like about $30 million into it, if I remember correctly. And Donald Trump put $18 million into it, his biggest supporters. So there is a democracy at stake, but we can't just keep playing politics with it. Like, it's not immediately going. If you're going to fund QAnon candidates, they're not going away. They're not disappearing. What you've done is you've given them more power. And sure, you've won in this election. But what about the next election? And like Mike says, what if there is no next election?
So I'm going to ask a hard question now. So I would say there's been an erosion of trust. And I think that's a part of what you're talking about. People don't know what to believe. Jitarth, what happened? How did Trump win? I mean, there's just, people aren't sure that they can believe sources they used to trust. So there's an erosion of trust in the system. And the way that some tech is used is it tries to take advantage of that, the confusion, and it produces these explanations that draw people in. I think I'm kind of capturing the way you all have described it to me. The question I have is, what do we do about that? Like, how do we balance the need to manage that with also the important principle of free speech, that you want people to be able to put what they believe out there, and you don't want to police whether it's true or you agree with it. Like, how do we regain the trust of the large population and not in some way throttle or diminish the amount of voices that are also out there? So Mike, I'll start with you on that.
Well,
thank God, Mike first.
Well, I think we have to reframe even how we talk about this. I mean, people who get kicked off of Twitter for violating its terms of service, they start crying that they've been censored and silenced. Well, no, you haven't been silenced. You've just been told by one particular platform that you are no longer welcome here. And I will always think that that's okay. Social media platforms and politicians do not decide what's true and what's false. But social media platforms do decide what they allow and what they don't allow. And if Twitter makes a ruling that says we are not going to allow any kind of video that could be perceived as anti-vaccine, that's not to say that a person is not allowed to watch those things, they're not allowed to spread them. They just can't do it there. They just have to go somewhere else. And, for a long time in conservatism, it was that sort of like, if you make a rule that I don't like, I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to go elsewhere. I'm going to vote with my feet, as they used to say. And now we've kind of had it flip around 180, where it's like everybody has to allow everything, and we're going to have free speech. And people don't even understand what free speech is. Free speech is not everyone says everything that they want and we debate it until somebody changes their mind, because that always devolves into racism, into anti-Semitism, into attacks on women and people of color. It always happens that way, because those are the voices that are not lifted up on social media platforms. So when people are told you can't be racist and anti-Semitic here, people take it as censorship. It's not censorship. It's just a platform saying, I don't allow this here. The problem is that it feeds into people's grievances. And people already think of themselves as not being listened to, that their opinions don't matter anymore, especially if you're a middle-aged white man in America. You're feeling like nobody cares what I think anymore. I'm not allowed to use the terms I used to use. I'm not allowed to tell the jokes I used to tell anymore. That's why something like Make America Great Again appealed to so many of these people, because great again was when I was a kid and when I was allowed to say whatever I wanted. And when men were men and women were in the kitchen. I mean, all of these stereotypes that just don't really apply anymore. So much of it is just anti-progress. And I think, unfortunately, if people are opposed to progress, we're never going to get anywhere. We're always going to be living in the same stratifications that we've lived in for the past generations. So I think in order to really change this, you've got to change people's minds. You've got to get people open to living a different kind of life and expressing opinions in different and healthier ways. And you're talking about an almost DNA level rewriting of the way millions and millions of people were raised. And that's not going to happen as long as you have major pundits and major influencers who want to keep them in that past, because it's so much more lucrative for them.
Got it. Well, that's all the time I have. I really appreciate both of your time, and thanks so much for Jitarth, getting out there and telling your story, and Mike also doing the work that you have to help us make sense of conspiracy theories and conspiracy thinking. Thank you both.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. Mike, always a pleasure.
Me too.
See you soon.
Yep.
And Katie, I'm so sorry for not responding earlier. Thank you very much. See you later. Comms.
All right. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.